Hey everyone, my name is Addison Hamrick, and my missional Helix is on reaching urban communities by restoring biblical manhood. The reason I chose this is because I have a heart for fatherless children and for urban church planting, and I think a lot of the issues that we see in the urban communities, whether that be poverty, divorce, abortion, crime, poor education, etc., um, all stems from men not stepping up and leading the way that they were designed to lead. And so, for theological reflection, we're going to look at God created men as head to initiate and lead. This is a complementarian view, which pretty much says that men and women are equal in dignity, but they have distinct and differing roles, and that these roles were corrupted by the fall. They weren't created by the fall. So these roles were intact before sin entered the world. And so, first evidence of this we see is man was created in the image of God to reflect his character. One of the attributes of God is that he is an initiator. We see this in creation in Genesis 1. So when he initiates, when he creates, creation responds. And so as a result, if man is supposed to reflect his character and create in his image, we can conclude that men are also designed to initiate and to lead. Another evidence of this is the order and design of creation, chronological order. Men were created first, women were created after men. God could have easily created man and woman at the same time, but he decided to purposely create this chronological order. Design of creation, differences in how God created man and woman. God breathed life into man and created woman from man. So just differences of that as well. You can even look at the differences in their reproductive systems. The way that men are designed, they're designed to initiate. And even for women, the way that their reproductive systems are designed is to respond and to receive. Another reason is the naming of woman. You see in Genesis 2, man names woman. And then in chapter 4, he names woman Eve. It shows his recognition of authority that man has over woman. And then responsibility placed on man. God gives the command to man in chapter 2 to keep the garden and to not eat of the tree. And then he also holds man accountable for sin. He calls out to man. And then later he calls out men for listening instead of leading in Genesis 3:17. We also see a big emphasis on man's loving headship and woman's submissiveness all throughout the New Testament scripture. And so, what are the roles of man and woman, and how were they corrupted by the fall, by sin entering the world? And so, man's role in the home. One of the roles of a man is to be a clarifier of identity. We see this in Genesis 49 when Jacob speaks into the lives of his sons and helps them understand who they are. We also see that men, or fathers, are spiritual leaders in the home. In Leviticus, we see that they have responsibility to circumcise their kids. Deuteronomy have a responsibility to instruct their children. And Numbers would have responsibility for the behavior and sexuality of the women in their home. So male impassivity actually led to sin entering into the world. So we're going to see how that played out, how men not leading actually led to sin entering into the world. And so we see this in Genesis 3. First sign is the serpent undercuts the design of God by approaching the woman instead of the man, which is the head. And all while the woman is being tempted, the man stands by passively and doesn't even take responsibility, and doesn't lead, and doesn't step in. And as a result, sin enters the world. They eat of the fruit. But when God calls out to man, he fails to take responsibility and blames the woman instead. So he's being impassive. He's not taking ownership of the things that the God has called him to do. And then lastly, in Genesis 3:17, we see that God calls out man for listening instead of leading. And so he calls to man saying, because you have listened to the woman. And so calling him out for listening instead of leading. And then, so what are some of the effects of the fall and sin entering into the world. First is that women will reject man's authority, and men will attempt to abuse their authority. So instead of complementing each other like they're designed to, they're actually going to compete against each other. And then lastly, men will experience difficulty in his role as a provider. So this takes us to cultural analysis, and in this section I want to examine 3 trends that I feel has negatively shaped our view of a 21st century man. The first is the hip-hop culture and extended adolescence. And so the first effect of hip-hop culture on urban communities is it distorts the definition of what a man is. Because of the lack of good role models, boys are looking elsewhere for what it means to be a man, and the images that they're getting is not good. Thugs then are becoming viable candidates for predominant image of manhood. Second, identity has become an artistic creation of man's choosing, as opposed to men being rooted in the image of God. And so with this line of thinking, who you are is based on a personal wish and desire as opposed to how God created you. And then lastly, there is a distortion of what a father is. With this culture, the cool father is down for no matter what. He's a friend of his kid, but he's not a father. His kid doesn't rear them, and oftentimes he's absent and irresponsible. Next, we see extended adolescence, which is essentially boys are just failing to become men. Not even godly men, but just men in general. 6 problems associated with this trend is, 1, there's a compromised maturity, so really boys with adult bodies. 2, fathers who are only friends. Men are seeking to identify with children as opposed to raising them and influencing them and guiding them. Subsidized picture of manhood, because men are not growing up. This is the picture that boys younger than them are getting, so it's just creating that same cycle. Unmarried women is increase of them because men are simply unfit for marriage now. Unhireable men, they're incapable of functioning in a professional environment because they often demand maturity and responsibility, which are attributes they do not have. And then lastly, life lived in fantasy. Men treat their lives like one big fantasy world, and as a result, they engage mostly through artificial means like the internet and video games instead of the real life. So in this world, everything revolves around them, making them incapable of contributing to the family, a church, or community, because all of those things require sacrifice, which a person in the fantasy world is unlikely to give in. Next trend is feminism. This trend or belief says that hierarchy produces inequality, which pretty much means that different means unequal. And as a solution to this, this trend or this movement is trying to get rid of differences between husbands and wives, or men and women, which is a deliberate attack on biblical manhood and womanhood. As a result, they view Christianity as an abusive religion because it is hierarchical, because they believe that it teaches that women are inferior to men, etc. But how does this affect men and their roles of men and women? First, it creates confusion about gender roles. It erases the distinction between men and women and makes their roles unclear. And as a result, parents are now failing to communicate to their children what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. Secondly, it creates relational confusion in the home. Men and husband and wife are unclear what their roles are. There's no clear leader because there is a refusal of God-given roles in women in the home. So these trends lead us to I actually forgot one. And my third trend is feminism of the church. And so this is in this trend, the church is viewed as a ladies' club. Essentially, Christianity has become feminized, and as a result, there's generally a lot more women than men in every type of the church, all throughout the world. Women are becoming the backbone of the church. They're having to step in where men are failing to lead and initiate. And as a result, Sunday services and ministries are catered now towards women. You can see it through the music. You can see it through the lack of ministries designated for men. How does this affect men? It decreases their involvement in the church. 25% of married women attend church without their husbands. Over 70% of boys raised in the church will abandon it during their teens and never return. And a typical congregation consists of 61% female and 39% male. It also reduces men's interest in the church. Men often find church dull and irrelevant because it fails to stir their hearts. So all these cultural trends lead us to a historical perspective. Where is our urban communities? What is their current state and what's caused it? So over the past 3 decades, urban communities have experienced some of the following: increased rates of unemployment, poverty, violence, disease, drug trafficking and use, decreased housing and environmental conditions, increased rates of single-parent households led by females, increased rates of teen births and out-of-wedlock childbearing, inadequate educational resources, which lead to increased rates of high school dropouts, and then lastly, decreases male church attendance and involvement. So what led to these things? What caused these? The first is a sharp increase in male and black male joblessness since 1970s, which is very strongly correlated to an increase in single-parent homes. This increase in joblessness is as a result of gender-related job opportunities. During this time, there was a loss of blue-collar jobs, which led to a decrease in jobs for men because these were traditionally held by men. But at the same time, there was an increase of jobs for women because jobs in support and social services increases, which was more tailored to a woman's gifting. And as a result, females actually became the primary breadwinner for the family, which resulted in less women being at home to raise the children. All this also resulted in urban communities becoming more reliant on welfare benefits in the government for their well-being. And African Americans' incomes are 44% less than the incomes of whites. Another result is the increase in number of households headed by single females. By the 1990s, African American households headed by single females outnumbered those headed by married couples. 60% of the children today will live in some link with a single parent. There's also a decrease in the average household income because of a lack of father. So without the father, you do not have his income coming in, so that led to a decrease in their income. There's also an increase of rates of divorce. Statistics show that there's almost 1 divorce for every 2 marriages since the 1970s. There is also an increase in out-of-wedlock childbearing. 72.2% of non-Hispanic black births are out of wedlock. And then lastly, there's an increase of crime rates and male incarceration, which have led to less men being at home. And so 1 in 3 black males born today can expect to spend some time in prison during their lifetime. These are all caused by lack of good role models, because we see that 85% of rapists and 85% of all youth sitting in prisons are from fatherless homes. So what are some policies that have led to the state of urban communities? The first is the Federal Housing Act of 1934. This act provided government support to stimulate home ownership for white families. And as a result, majority of white families left the cities for the suburbs. This was essentially voluntary segregation. And examples of traditional families were lost in the inner city because of it. The next was the federal transportation and highway policies. Because white families are in the suburbs, they funded highways systems to connect the suburbs and the cities. But because of this, it created barriers between the poor and minority neighborhoods with the central business districts, which increased the difficulty of urban men to find jobs. And then lastly, the rise of feminism and feminization of the church. Betty Friedan, the author of Feminine Mystique, is a prominent leader of the feminist movement back in the day. She saw that women were happy and concluded that it was due to a male-dominated society. And then Margaret Sanger She's a leader of the birth control and abortion movement, which was actually focused a lot on poverty-stricken populations for some horrible reasons. But this movement sought to reduce the differences between men and women, which is a deliberate attack against their roles as man and woman. And then next, the industrialization, or the Industrial Revolution. This forced men to seek work away from home, which created a split between the public and private spheres of life. Public sphere became more secularized, while the private sphere stayed where it was at. And as a result, religion came to be seen as for women and children and not relevant to real world of businesses, politics, and academics. So what can the church do to restore biblical manhood and womanhood and reach the urban communities by doing so? I think the first thing they can do is boldly teach on biblical manhood and womanhood. Why they need to do that? For one, it's the church's responsibility to make a positive case for this biblical worldview. And it is also required if godly families will ever be the norm in the urban communities. They need to be seen that the power of Christ is able to keep their family strong. And then second, it's also due to the deliberate attack of biblical teaching of manhood and womanhood by feminist ideology. So what essentially should be taught? Well, there are 5 fundamental pillars for a healthy and holy family. The first is that marriage is honorable and for a lifetime. You see that in Hebrews. Next, our children are a blessing. Third is that marriage is a covenant between one man and one woman. And then fourth, the purpose of the family, which we see is to reflect God's glory and to produce faithful followers of Christ. So that goes into discipleship as well. And then fifth, they also need to teach on the specific roles of each family member. So men must lead, women must help, and children must obey. Next thing you can do, the church is, the community is desperate for the church to provide examples of healthy families and godly male role models to disciple men in the urban community. Why is this such a need? Because of the few examples that there is in the urban communities of biblical male leadership in marriages. As a result of this, it's difficult to develop productive adults and strong marriages. Because of this lack of God-honoring adult role models, there's a desperate need for the church to provide these for the community. They need to see examples of men and women who can run the race and go the distance. And then it is also true to say that the loudest sermon that an urban pastor will preach in the urban community is his lifestyle. Another reason is that young boys look up to their fathers. They're looking at men to see how they should act, and so we need to provide them good role models for that. Another reason why this is needed is because of the unstable family structure in the urban communities. This current condition has actually made effective discipleship nearly unachievable. We need to regain the importance of a strong family structure. And then there's also a need for Christian commitment due to the vast number of minorities in the urban communities. A lot of them don't even need conversion to Christianity, but they need to be shown what a commitment to Christianity looks like. And then the community aspect comes in because one of the biggest needs is to replace their negative environment with an environment that includes positive, God-honoring relationships that will encourage and support them. Next, we also need to provide opportunities for men to serve and be challenged. We need to challenge men with God-sized visions. Men want to be a part of something that matters, so we need to encourage them in initiatives like church planning or missions or a missional engagement. Men have this compelling desire for risk, and so we need to bring that together. And then we also need to encourage them to serve and allow them to lead within the church. We need to empower men to be leaders in their spheres and affirm them in their ability to lead. Lastly, we need to provide practical assistance and training. Why? Because it adds credibility to the message. It is inexcusable for those of us who engage in apologetics to overlook the physical needs. Men lacking the ability to find work will find it difficult to respond positively to the challenges of marriages and raising children. The second one is we need to provide classes on job-related skills. This leads to self-sufficiency, it provides job opportunities, and it improves self-esteem. And then free childcare also allows men and women to seek out jobs that they normally wouldn't have. And lastly, it's important to have a role in the public school systems because by doing this, we're essentially working upstream to affect the minds and the thoughts of young boys and girls, because the majority of them will be in the public school systems. So we need to move upstream and affect their thinking at a younger level. Well, I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you decide to do urban ministry, I think that manhood, biblical manhood, is something that needs to be addressed and something that needs to be taught and developed if we want to see our urban communities become more Christ-like. Thank you so much.